The WJXT Public Affairs Department presents Town Meeting, a discussion on a topic of community interest. Tonight, the Dame Point Bridge. Your moderator is Ernie Mastriani.
Good evening. Over the past couple of years, much has been said both pro and con about the construction of a Dame Point Bridge as proposed by the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. Arguments surrounding the project have been heard at official public hearings as well as at informal gatherings and in the media. Step by step, the Dame Point Bridge has moved closer to becoming a reality, and as late as last week appeared to need only cabinet approval of the financial aspects. Now, however, in view of a ruling by Attorney General Robert Chevin, it appears that any and all points of concern about the bridge may be raised at a full-blown special cabinet meeting tentatively set for April. Tonight on Town Meeting, we've gathered some of the people with definite opinions about the bridge. Some speak for themselves, others represent groups or agencies that may be affected by the construction of the bridge. There are both opponents and proponents of the project. Unfortunately, there are no representatives of the JTA with us tonight. All of the authority's board members and the executive director were invited, but all declined the invitation for one reason or another. A telegram asking them to reconsider the invitation was sent to each, but to no avail. With that in mind, we'll begin our program. Some of the most recent, most vocal opposition to the bridge has come from the maritime interests. And Captain Danahy, if we might, let's start with you. Why the opposition?
I feel like an important keynote speaker here. Let me first start with prefacing my remarks to emphasize that I am neither for nor against the bridge. My responsibilities locally are for the port's safety as the captain of the port of the Jacksonville zone. And in carrying out my responsibilities, I have made a safety analysis of the bridge proposal that has been submitted to the Coast Guard for issuance of a permit to build the bridge. In that report, I have expressed concern for the vulnerability of the bridge in the event of an accident, such as involving a tank ship under the bridge with either fire or explosion. And I have also expressed concern for the capability of the bridge to contribute to a maritime accident, being located in what I consider a hazardous portion of the river. And as a result of that safety report to my district commander in Miami and the news media's response to it, I'm here tonight.
The transportation is talking about now, or at least considering a proposal to move the southerly end of the bridge. Would that satisfy your concern?
I really can't answer that question fully at this stage. I understand that Miami has received a proposed alteration to the bridge design. And my understanding is that they will be sending out this report of the changes that are proposed to everybody that has expressed any interest in the bridge. And then they will be given 30 days to comment. And as a result, I will also review the report when I receive it and either revise my safety analysis or let it stand.
Mr. Mosley, as representative of the Propeller Club, you also have expressed some concern in recent days about the bridge. Would you elaborate, please?
Well, I believe our concern, Ernie, is basically, as the captain of the port has indicated, we expressed concern. Our organization is composed of a pretty broad-based cross-section of the community, about 400 members that are involved in the direct relation with the port, even though they may do so in sort of an indirect way, not actually as vessel owner, but persons who supply ships, pilots, and so forth. And our concern was really centered on three aspects, and perhaps the sum total goes to have these concerns really been studied as they should. And those areas are the principally the southern portion that Captain Danahy had mentioned. We were concerned about the ultimate deepening of the harbor and whether the structure as such may affect a decision that Colonel Wisdom may be eventually working on, for example, as to harbor deepening and those matters. And we're concerned also as to the general safety, because vessels as they are difficult instrumentalities when they're involved in heavy cargo, and they're involved in many things that the average person just doesn't think about. They're treated differently as an entity. They're treated differently by law, and it's just a consideration that has to be gone into in great detail.
How does the construction of the bridge affect the deepening of the harbor?
Well, I think it's a concern in that there may be, and I sort of underscore maybe, there may be problems that might develop not this year or next year, but in the years to come as to the setting of the structure and whether or not certain deepening could be done in the future.
Colonel Wisdom, could you address that point?
Yes, Ernie. As you know, we have the Corps of Engineers has a 38-foot project there. And we just got, by congressional add-on, the authority to do an additional study. And that study is to determine the feasibility of deepening the area, the channel between Mayport and Blount Island, down to 45 feet. And the bridge, of course, will span the channel. And so if we go from 38 to 45 feet, our concern is the location of the piers. And our people and the Corps have been working very closely with Sverdrup and Parcels. And I believe they have effected a change to the pier location by moving them south. And I believe it's some 130 feet or so that they're moving it. And that's our primary concern.
Mr. Reeder, when the Planning Board was getting ready to make its recommendations, were these points considered?
No, I don't believe those came to our attention.
Why not?
It's our job as the Jacksonville Area Planning Board to plan a project. We don't get into design and technical aspects of that nature. That's really in the prerogative of the JTA.
Mr. Mosley, if I might bounce it back to you once more, why have the maritime interests waited so long, or at least it appears that you all have waited a reasonably long time to raise the questions that you're raising now?
Well, I believe, number one, most of the concerns were voiced back in the spring and summer of '75 by various letters that have been in most persons' hands. There has been some feeling, of course, that somewhere along the line this will be studied in more detail, and I believe that there have been comments at various proceedings that, oh yes, we're looking into that, and sort of situations that make everyone feel a little more comfortable. But when you get down to the end, whether anybody has waited or not is not going to make the situation safer. So it has, it has to be said, the concerns have to be expressed, and the things that we've felt that are real concerns have been brought up. I believe many of the pilots, for example, had testified at various proceedings along the way. They had brought up the problem of the JEA has a 175-foot overhead in the Blount Island area, and of course that's something that seemed as if it should be considered to be the minimum height. There must have been some reason that somebody chose 175 feet for the overhead cable. So these things were brought up. They have been mentioned at various levels, and I believe it goes back to either April or August of '75.
Mr. McGiffin, with the construction of the Dame Point Bridge and the possible deepening of the harbor up there to 45 feet, what does this do to the downtown area, the Talleyrand area, as far as shipping is concerned? What is your concern?
Well, my concern is on 2 points. One is the height of the bridge, and the other is the safety aspect. Of course, the height is only dollars and cents. It's not the seriousness of the safety aspect. Senator Maddox Hare had the courtesy of sending my son a complete report from Sverdrup and Parcel here, which I've tried to make something out of, and apparently they are excellent engineers, but I don't believe they're seamen. And I notice in here the large ships which you've called at Jacksonville, they list the name of the ship, the length, and the width, which would be the beam. And they say keel to topmast. I think by that they mean the top of the mast, because the topmast is a part of a mast. And then they list the waterline to the top of the mast, which is 24 feet less, which is based on the theory that the ships, to be maneuverable, should be ballasted down to 24 feet aft. Well, usually there's a mast forward about the same height as the mast aft. So if the stern is ballasted to 24 feet to come up the river, or go out of the river, whichever way she's going in a light condition, the bow may be 1 foot or 2 feet or maybe 6 feet, very little, so that this figure for the waterline at the top of the mast is for the aftermast, and the forward mast may be 800 or 900 feet forward of that and 20 feet or so higher. So that is something that should be taken into consideration, you know, in going into the height. Now, true, we have the two bridges uptown, the Hart Bridge and the Matthews Bridge, which are comparatively low, but the only ships that have to pass that are ships going to the shipyard, and that is no cargo carried up that far. So that part is only a problem for the shipyard and not for the entire port. Now, the other item, the safety item, people seem to think that they drive an automobile and it steers from the front and is very positive and so on, but a ship doesn't handle the same way. It steers from the after end, and it doesn't start to turn until the stern is moved to one side. And in maneuvering ships, it's divided up into different portions, the advance and the transfer and so on. And a ship may advance quite a few hundred yards ahead before it actually starts to turn. And meantime, the stern is going off to the port side while she's swinging to starboard. And also, the length of a ship has increased, well, since I started on the waterfront here 50 years ago, or thereabouts, started in 1926. Ships then were 4,000 or 5,000 tons. Well, now we get ships in 100,000 tons. And the ships then were 300 and 400 feet long, was a good-sized ship. Now we've, I think, 900 feet. We've had them in 900 feet. There's mention in here of 1,100 and 1,200 feet. So that's quite a length to take care of. And this bridge is laid out to be built on a turn in the river, which means the ship is going to have to be maneuvering at that point. To make that worse, there's the back river, which may bring a current in one way while the current is a different way in the river, and can cause the ship to shear one way or the other. And I feel personally that with the bridge as designed, it's not a question of if, but it's a question of when there's a serious accident there, which may bring the whole bridge down, or may burn up a big tanker of oil, may cause a lot of people to be killed. It seems to me it would be so much simpler to move the bridge to the westward, about between Brill's Cut Range and Upper Quarantine Range, let the bridge go vertically across the river instead of at an angle, and on a straight part of the river where the ship could be steaming in a straight direction.
Captain Moore, would shippers or ship's captains be reluctant to come into Jacksonville if that bridge were built the way it's designed?
I would say so, yes.
What then would this do to the economy of the port?
Well, naturally the ships are going to go to other ports to where they can enter and discharge their cargo, and Jackson was going to lose that much business. They're going to bring their other ports, and maybe some of the cargo may come by rail or truck, but it will not come by water, and the major part of the money that it comes to the port now will be lost.
What should the minimum height of that bridge be in order to satisfy the needs of the big ships?
The minimum height should be no less than 175 feet above the water.
Councilman Brewer, what would it take? How much money, or can you tell us, and what would the reaction be from council to building the bridge that high? I would assume that it would involve a considerably larger amount of money than is now being contemplated.
Ernie, I don't know. I'm not an engineer, and I I haven't studied it, but I do recall that there were conversations about raising the height last year and I believe the year before, and we were talking in terms, as I recall, of $10 to $20 million to do what was required. Of course, if it's a safety hazard and if it's going to create shipping problems, I don't think we have a choice. I don't know why either that at this late point it's so critical. It was critical all along, and I had the feeling that those problems were being dealt with in some reasonable manner. I'm a little bit surprised to see how strongly the shipping interests are tonight, or putting forth their position tonight, and I'm sure that if the problem is as critical as it seems to be, that it's going to have to be resolved. Apparently the JTA has dealt with a portion of it, and that's by moving the piers so that a portion of the safety hazard can be resolved.
But it's my understanding they have not moved the piers. They're considering it.
Well, if they've considered it and they've presented it, I would suspect that they're indicating that if that's what should be done, they're willing to do it. I haven't talked with them. I don't know. I know what I've read and what I've heard tonight.
I suppose if we had one of their representatives here, we might be able to ask them.
Well, I suppose that's true. I don't know.
Mr. Mastriani.
Yes, sir.
Over 2 years ago, I was on a committee, myself, one of the sea pilots, and one of the terminal managers, another fella, on a committee to raise the height of the bridge. We had a number of meetings with the different people in the city, and they told us that if the bridge had to be more than 152 feet high, it would not be built. They would not raise it. Now, we was argued down at every point we went. I'm not going to comment at who the gentleman was that told me it wouldn't be raised, though.
Councilman Carlucci?
Ernie, to answer your question on the height, I've been told it's $1 million a foot to go up. So far, we've been dealing on this program with the bridge, and it's on the assumption it's going to be built. I wonder if it needs to be built. I wonder if that's our #1 priority. But before you get to that, Captain Bolton is here from the bar pilots. He can tell you about the height.
Captain Bolton?
Well, as far as the bar pilots opposing the bridge, we never have opposed the bridge, but we've been opposed the design of the bridge and the location of the bridge, and that goes back far as July of 1975. And we sent letters to the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Transportation. And I served on that board, and I attended various public meetings. And their remarks then, they said it would cost approximately $1 million a foot to raise this bridge. And they said if it cost $1 million a foot, we would not be able to afford to build this bridge. I said, well then, if you cannot raise the bridge, how about moving the bridge farther to the east or to the west in a straightaway in case we lose the steering gear, the power board, the vessel? A vessel will track in a straight line, but a vessel will not track in a curve. Now, from my experience of 10 years as a bar pilot in the St. Johns River, an inbound vessel would not create too much of a hazard for it is the design of the bridge, even if you built it like it was now out there in the middle of the river in 25 foot of water, because you're on a straightaway. Then if you lose the plant, you can just run the ship aground because it will track in a straight line. But your problem is the outbound vessel. And these tankers, 10 years ago in the port of Jacksonville, a large tanker was 700 feet. Today, that's an average ship coming up the St. Johns River. They're running 800-900 feet with drafts of 38 feet. In other words, they're clearing the bottom in some places in this river by 6 inches to 1 foot with gasoline and oil and products like that. It's very dangerous products. Now, when you come downbound out of Jacksonville with one of these vessels loaded, you say, well, these vessels come in and discharge all their cargo in Jacksonville. No longer, not since we have a 38-foot channel. They'll come in with 38 feet and they'll pump out to 34 feet. Most of the ships that are coming out today are modern ships with the engine room and all aft, because that's a cheaper way to construct a ship. You cut down in the tail shaft. So these ships, you're on the stern piloting the ship with approximately 700 foot of ship in the front of you. As Mr. McGiffin stated, when you come down to make that turn at Dane Point, you got a 67-degree turn and you got to make it in 4/10 of a mile. And your speed along that time's about, in that area is about 8 to 10 knots. And I've been told where you can get tugboats down there. Well, if a ship is moving 8 to 10 knots, a tugboat is useless. A tug cannot stay alongside of a ship even making the turn. Now, I've been told where you say, well, if you make it, let's say you're making this turn and you're outbound, we build this island out there to protect this pillar. I said, well, that's great. Now, with an outbound vessel, with a flood current in, this current's going to deflect from the island, and when the ship will be outbound, she's going to swing to the port. When she swings to the port, she'll be pointing at all the ships docked at Blunt Island Terminal, which is usually 4 to 5 ships there at one time. So regardless, if you put the island out there, you're creating another problem. Now, when you're making this turn and outbound, your bow is swinging to the port and your stern is swinging down into this bight, into this bend, and that's where the abutment is, a south abutment to support this bridge, which, as we all know, is 1,200 feet of concrete and steel there. So then when they decided to put the rocks around, I said, well, that's great. Now we can gut the ship and we'll put the oil in the river. So the only way we've discussed this with the transportation, I've discussed it with the city council.
How about the planning board?
The planning board, the Duval delegation. I privately went up and sat down with the planning board, the designers of the bridge, and I've been told, well, the pilots would like to have it up on dry land, and they'd like it 200 feet in the air. Well, the pilots can pilot those ships. We can pilot these ships if you put the pillars out, say like where you, well, let's take, for instance, the Matthew Bridge, as the gentleman mentioned a while ago with the tugboats and what have you out up there. Those ships coming out of the shipyard, we have 4, 5, 6 tugboats available right alongside the ships. They're light draft ships. They're moving about 3 or 4 miles an hour. The tugs alongside, they're right there. And same way if you lose the plant, practically all of the pilots have lost the plant. I lost the plant on the ship last week and missed the Hart Bridge by 10 feet. But I had a tug alongside of me. Now, if I got a loaded tanker, that tug is useless. He can't even stay alongside. I'll break his lines. I'll sink the tug. So that's what we've tried to talk to the gentleman. We said, well, why don't you move the bridge down to where the Fulton Dam cut off by the high wire and put the bridge on the Port Authority property along with the high wire. You already own the property. You got a 150-foot right-of-way there. Then that way, all your pillars will be on dry land. You'll be on a straightaway. That's a safe place to put the bridge.
And the answer?
Yes, sir. It would cost too much to make the curve in the bridge and raise the height of the bridge.
We're going to have to pause on that. We'll be back in just a moment. Ms. Grimes, during the break you were waving your arms frantically. What do you have to offer?
Well, I couldn't help but respond when you were asking these gentlemen why these concerns hadn't been voiced before. I have in my files their letters. I think they were dated April, around that time of 1975. So these concerns have come up before. And it was one of the things that struck terror in my heart when I was a novice on that planning board and I was being pressed to react, as were all board members, in a very fast manner. I felt that I'd been collared by a hard salesman who was telling me, you better buy this right now because tomorrow it's going to be too late. And when you have to make up your mind in that kind of hurry about anything, I say, whoa. I say, back off and let's look at this, let's examine all the angles. It was that kind of pressure that was being exercised.
Who was exercising the pressure?
Well, when I asked that question, the chairman of our board said, don't worry about this, Ann. You're new on the board. You don't understand these things.
And the chairman of the board was?
Mr. Friedman.
Mr. Friedman.
And he gave me reassurances. He gave me assurances that I wouldn't have to worry about that bridge.
Would you respond, please?
Well, first, I really don't think I'm a very good salesman. I tried selling Bibles in the summer one time and bombed out abominably. Secondly, I don't think there was ever any pressure put on any member of the board, certainly not by me. But to the factual aspects rather than the non-factual aspects, which I think have really infected this whole question about the Dames Point Bridge. And if you don't mind, I'll speak to facts, not to innuendos. I personally chaired in 1976 at least 5 public hearings on Dames Point Bridge. I do not recall at any one of those hearings anybody from the Coast Guard or the Pilots Association appearing and voicing these tremendous concerns which they apparently now have about safety. Secondly, if there are safety hazards, it seems to me that that's terribly irrelevant to the issue which we're now facing not only in this county but at the cabinet level, and that is whether or not the bridge ought to be built. If there are safety problems, that's a design factor which can be worked out in the future. I feel quite certain that JTA is not going to build a bridge which will create a tremendous hazard to shipping in this county. I've never heard anyone say until tonight that this bridge was going to cut down or cause us any great economic problems in our port. In fact, all the information which we had when I was still on the planning board, which I no longer am, quite to the contrary, that this bridge and the industrial development which we expected in the northeast part of our county was going to help the Port of Jacksonville considerably.
Senator Scarborough, have you heard anything yet that would cause you to change your mind? You've gone from one side to the other. Are you still for the bridge now, or?
Yes, and I never went from one side to the other, Ernie. I refused to make up my mind until I could get acquainted with some facts that were not presented very early in the debate. I think the question of bridge location and safety is a very pertinent question. Everyone here tonight would probably have a different choice of where the bridge should or should not be located. From a personal standpoint, I've never felt that the location currently under consideration is the most logical place to put the bridge. But that's not the role of the legislature. That's the role of the people that are here tonight, and those, by the way, that are not here. I'm very disappointed that they failed to show up. But, Ernie, when we were listening to the pros and cons of the bridge issue as a delegation and as a legislature, some of these questions, safety questions, were raised, and we did anticipate further questions being raised in the same category. And I'm not surprised that they're raised tonight. The Corps of Engineers and the Coast Guard will play a very predominant role, I'm confident, in where the bridge ultimately will be located. I think that in view of those comments, I'll reserve what else I have to say specifically to the question of should we build a bridge or should we not build a bridge.
In light of the fact that in order to make the bridge safe, according to the maritime interest, it's going to cost another $20 to $25 million, could the legislature back up that kind of money?
I think so, Ernie. I might also point out that for each year in delay and start of construction, you're talking about the same amount of money in increased construction costs. But I'm not willing to say that let's go ahead and build a bridge, forget about safety. I think that that's one of the most paramount questions that must be answered before the first piling is driven. And I personally concur with some of the safety factors that have been brought out tonight, but like I pointed out to you, we're not in the bridge location business. These gentlemen are experts in that, and we're going to have to rely on their expertise in where the bridge is ultimately placed.
Let's shift gears for just a moment, if we might. We've talked now about the safety, maritime interest, the economy. What about priorities? Councilman Carlucci, that's been one of your favorite topics ever since the whole thing began years ago. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Before we go to the priority
Sure.
and shift gears, could we ask the bar pilots a question about how ships are scheduled into and out of the port? Are they not scheduled into and out of the port based upon the tidal situations that we're confronted with in this area? Or can they not be scheduled into and out of the port based upon tidal information that's available to them?
Captain Moore, you're shaking your head no.
Captain Bolt. Which way you want to take this approach, just inbound or outbound?
Both directions, the tide flows in and out.
Right.
So I want to know whether or not the ships are scheduled in and out of the port based upon tidal information.
Right, that's correct. At the various drafts. Let's take an outbound phosphate ship from the bulk terminal in Jacksonville. She will sail 1.5 hours after flood current at Mayport, which gives you approximately an hour or so of rising in tide. To make this easy for undocking this vessel and handling this vessel proceeding down the river. So at that time, when you meet the flood current, it's a necessity that vessel has to sail with that type of current and tide. So when that vessel gets to Dane Point, that current will be striking the port side of that vessel and shoving up bow, or striking the port side of the vessel, setting the vessel onto this south abutment. Now, in the inbound, the vessel will start in a loaded ship over a 32-foot draft, will start in with a flood current. So when she starts through the jetty, she will have the flood current astern. We do that for several reasons, for the rise in the tide and for easy handling of the vessel. And when the vessel proceeds up the river, the current's going to be astern of this vessel. Now, that's one point I'd like to point out to this committee. I don't think they've ever considered this. This channel is only 500 feet wide, and we're bringing ships in here 800 feet long. But once those ships